Look, one thing I can suggest is, particularly with the Queensland plan process going on, get involved in your local community, figure out what you want your economic future to look like, which industries you think have good growth potential, and will build capacity in your region, and put forward if you think there's an alternate plan, there's preferable to everybody in that region, put that forward, get behind it, and start lobbying politicians to support that.
Thank you. It's not very easy to hear the back. So
do we say again?
What? No, we'll just put the next question on. So not something we'll go to. We'll hand it to Joe and we'll pass it along when the question is. So I have another question, please, sir.
Those questions for Laura. I've been told in recent times that the city of Sydney is facing running out of natural gas by 2025, and a number of mining companies are racing for CSG expansion and exploration. Obviously, the Narrabri situation, which has just come up in the press in the last couple of months, is a case in point. You talk about the coal industry slipping or starting to bottom out. Is that bottoming out because of the influence of renewable energies? So if we've got a solution for coal or generating power through other means, where is the solution for natural gas? Because a city the size of Sydney that runs out of its ability to be able to heat itself is very dangerous, particularly when the Australian economy has shrunken so much. Federal governments over the last 40 years have shrunken the second tier of economic powerhouse in the nation, and that is manufacturing. They picked that up and put it offshore. They left us pretty much with primary and tertiary industries, of which tourism is a tertiary industry. The primary industry of agriculture has also suffered a similar fate to manufacturing. So the whole premise of government policy in the last 40 years has been to back the mining industry. The question is, what is the solution for that? How can we change that government focus? Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
I'll just come to the lectern. There were a lot of questions in that. I want to touch briefly on natural gas, which we did look at to some extent in our reports. So it's true that New South Wales as a whole has 20 or so years worth of natural gas reserves for its own consumption. That's not all the natural gas that's available in Australia, however, and New South Wales does import at the moment from Victoria and South Australia. What we're seeing with coal seam gas, however, is development of an unconventional gas resource, mostly for export overseas. That's what the LNG plants on Curtis Island are being built for, and that development is the first time along the east coast of Australia that we've seen pricing of gas at international levels. So gas prices on the east coast of Australia have historically been around $3 to $4 per gigajoule. They're heading up towards international prices, which are anywhere around 9 to 12, could go higher depending upon what happens with global supply and demand of exports of natural gas. So when you hear people say that Sydney, will fall over if it doesn't develop northern New South Wales gas reserves, I would first of all ask where those gas reserves are actually going, who's buying them, and whether they're actually available for Sydney-siders to buy. And then secondly, I live in Sydney. I consider myself at the moment lucky enough to have gas for cooking because it is something I prefer to cook with, but I don't heat my house with it. And this is possibly the first or second time in about 20 years I've lived in a house that has that, and I've moved every year and a half or so. So it's not, I don't think it's necessarily something that Sydney is as dependent upon as you may initially think. Your overarching question, I think is about whether gas is an appropriate or should be a transition fuel between coal and renewable energy. There are lots of different views of this. Well, in fact, there aren't many different views. There's yes or no. What it will come down to is whether we can transition. So if renewable energy technologies, and particularly base load renewable energy, so renewable energy that can supply at any time of the day, and very responsive renewable energy, so renewable energy that can suddenly kick in when you turn your air conditioner on. If those two things are developed and become cost effective in the near term, then we may see a transition that doesn't result in a very large expansion of gas use in Australia for electricity. I hope I've answered your question.
Thanks, Laura. Take one more question from him. We might take two questions. Brief, please, and we might take one more from the net. So,
very quick one for Laura. Just to put in perspective, mining in Queensland, you said about 6%. So what would tourism be, for example?
Can I take that one on notice? I've been on a really long road trip just to temporarily up that number, but if you come up to me later on, I'll give you my card and we can answer that one by email. Thanks.
Thank you. Please.
Just a question. If with all the dredging, with all the sludge that goes into the ocean, what's the alternative for that? Do you bring it back onshore?
Well, one of the issues in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, the challenge to the sea dumping permit, is exactly that, because under the London Protocol there's quite an equation there as to how you look at the environmental impacts and potential harm from dumping in ocean compared to using the spoil for something else like reclamation or on land. So it's a complicated equation of trying to look at the benefits and detriments of different types of disposal.
Tony, please.
I can speak specifically regarding Apple Point, and they had two other options there. One was to dump on land and one was to extend the trestles. Both options were knocked back by the proponents because of cost. They also spun that out to say the trestles were deemed unsafe, but we found that that wasn't true. Marine Safety Queensland and Programm both said trestles were fine, just extend the trestles, that's the preferred option. They also said that dumping the dredge spoils on land because of acid sulfate soil formation was deemed environmentally unsafe. And that was proven to be false as well in their own documents. They said in their own documents that it was not of such a content that it couldn't be safely managed on land. So both those options were available, but at the end of the day, the cheapest option was picked.
Thank you. I'll see Lisa for other questions. We'll take one from the back, please.
Yes.
Please.
Just to follow up, because I think somebody mentioned costs before. When you look at environmental impact statements, how often do you see that the costs are included as well as the benefits? Somebody mentioned that they're done by the proponents by and large. What seems to me to be important is that when environmental impact statements are put together, whether it's by a government authority or a proponent, that there has to have both sides of the ledger in it so that you can evaluate costs and benefits.
Sounds like a question for an economist.
I'm
Joe go first. I'm not as familiar with the AS.
Well, this again is an excellent question. When an environmental impact statement is prepared in Queensland, it's under our major projects legislation, and it often deals with Commonwealth as well as Queensland issues. The economists always, the economists for the community groups or the ones we work with always look very closely at how the economic analysis is done, because in many cases we've looked at, there is not a proper cost-benefit analysis done at all. What you see in even EISs for major projects is just an economic activity statement. There will be so many jobs created in relation to the project, but you don't see the full picture, including job losses from surrounding regional industries. So I know that there are official documents from the Queensland Treasury that say for project analysis, cost-benefit analysis should be done, but unfortunately in practice we've seen a number of cases where those have not been done for major projects.
Thank you.
So just to add to that, when project proponents look at the economic benefits of a project, they often use a multiplier, which I like to refer to as a fudge factor. It says, okay, for every job that we think we can directly create through this project, there'll be X more jobs that will flow on from that. And so, to the point Joe just made, then they rarely consider where those jobs might be pulled from, and whether that will impact other industries. And there's generally not much evidence behind that fudge factor. But you mentioned costs as well as benefits. It's actually very hard to estimate the economic cost for something if you don't have a negative impact and that hasn't happened yet. And so even if somebody were quite upfront and tried to accurately estimate the negative costs, there's a risk that because of all the uncertainty involved, that cost could actually be a lot higher than ever made into an environmental impact statement.
Thank you. We will take one more question, then I'll wrap up. Another light. The lighting here is going up and down, which I think is a sign that we're supposed to be leaving. Sorry, no more questions from the floor. Apologies if you didn't get a chance. We'll just take the one that's on the board, and maybe we'll go to John to answer this, with this close to France. I'm living in France, physically far from Australia. How can we act here?
Well, I'll just say that so WWF is a global organisation, and when it comes to the reef, we're working closely with EDO and the Marine Conservation Society, and with a very, very local focus. But I'd have to say that all around the globe, people are very concerned. I said this in my talk, very concerned about what's happening on the reef. And I feel as an Australian, as a North Queenslander, I don't feel any sort of defensiveness about that. I really welcome the involvement of people all around the globe, because I think the reef, for all the reasons that Tony pointed out, it's really a global phenomenon. It's of world importance. And so we are encouraging, WWF, we're encouraging people all around the world to get involved, to support financially, if they see that way, the efforts of AMCS and EDO and WWF Australia, but also to make their views well known publicly. Because it's through transparency in these sorts of issues, it's by opening up the discussion around the issues that proper decision making, I think, or public interest decision making will come about. But if it's not for civil society and the engagement of people all around the globe showing an interest and letting politicians know that they don't want these decisions made behind closed doors or buried under reams of paper and reports that are indecipherable, they do want transparency and they want to be engaged. So I don't know if that answers the Chris's question so much, but it's really a plea for people to get engaged in Australia and overseas in the fight to save the reef.
Thanks, John. Thank you for all your questions. If you didn't have a chance to ask a question, please do grab the panel afterwards. They'll be hanging around for a moment. Look, I found it a very engaging evening. We've heard a wonderful range of perspectives about the challenges facing the reef. And it's reminded me to an extent about that very first campaign ANCS ran to save the reef with partners 50 years back. 50 years ago we faced a government hell-bent on developing the reef. Very strong parallel with today. There was strong local and community opposition to those plans to dig up the coral from the reef and turn it into limestone, as there is today. There was a landmark legal challenge in the High Court that was won. And the economic justification for those proposals to dig up the limestone were very thin. But perhaps the telling factor back then was that people, ordinary people, Queenslanders, Australians, got behind the campaign to save the reef. And I like to think that we owe a debt of gratitude to those people. Because now, 50 years down the line, how ridiculous does it seem that 50 years ago we were planning to dig up the very coral of a Great Barrier Reef to turn into land improver. And I hope and I strongly believe, given the strength of public support that's mobilising behind this campaign 50 years down the line from a previous one, but perhaps in another 50 years, people will look back and be grateful that right now, people, economists, scientists, lawyers, tourism operators, and just the general public stood up for the reef once again. So thank you for coming tonight. If you want to know more about the Fight for the Reef campaign, please visit the website you can see here. If you'd like to support the campaign, and we have colleagues outside that will gladly send you a t-shirt or take donations from you. I would encourage you also to look at the petitions we have out the front there as well. You can sign a petition and raise these concerns with your politicians, as many people did 50 years back when we first saved the reef. Thank you once again.